A week before my brother's wedding, I closed a $4.2 million compliance deal with the city of Charleston. I wrote the proposal. I structured the bid. I sat across from the procurement board in a room that smelled like old coffee and municipal carpet and answered every question they had about bonding capacity, project timelines, and liability frameworks. The board chair asked me to walk them through the risk mitigation strategy for the Calhoun Street project, and I did it from memory, no notes, because I had written every line of that strategy myself in my home office at midnight 3 weeks earlier. I did this in a navy blazer and flat boots because I don't own heels that survive a job site, and the city of Charleston doesn't care what you wear as long as your numbers hold up. My numbers always hold up. I have been the general counsel and operations director of Whitfield & Sons General Contracting for 8 years. I built the software that runs every active project. I personally guaranteed the surety bonds that allow us to hold public contracts. I cultivated the client relationships that grew a $3 million residential outfit into a $30 million commercial operation. My brother Derek is the president. His name is on the building, his face is on the website. And on Saturday, June 15th, his new wife seated me in the kitchen of the Middleton Place carriage house with the catering staff at a folding table between a man refilling chafing dishes and a woman arranging dessert plates. She gave me a place card. It said Nadia in cursive propped against a water glass with a smudge on the rim. I should tell you how I ended up in that kitchen, but the truth is I'd been in that kitchen my whole life. They just finally gave me the chair to prove it. I was 23 when I joined the family business. Fresh out of law school at the University of South Carolina, a computer science degree from Clemson underneath that, and the kind of energy that comes from believing your family will see what you're worth if you just work hard. Enough. My father, Earl Whitfield, started the company in 1994 with one pickup truck and a handshake reputation. Residential jobs. Deck replacements, bathroom renovations, the occasional kitchen gut job for someone in the neighborhood who'd heard Earl was fair and showed up when he said he would. By the time I graduated, the company was doing about $3 million a year, all residential, all dependent on my father's personal relationships and my brother's ability to shake hands and make people feel like they were getting more than they were paying for. Derek was 26, then already installed as project manager, already posting photos of himself on job sites he visited for 20 minutes. He had this gift for the visible parts of the business. The handshake that made a subcontractor feel like family. The toast at the client dinner that sounded spontaneous but was the same 3 jokes he'd been rotating for years. The grin he wore in every company photo, the one that said, "Trust me, I'm the guy in charge." And he was good at it. I won't pretend he wasn't. Derek could walk onto a job site and make a foreman who was 3 weeks behind schedule feel like they were winning. He could sit across from a building inspector and turn a citation into a conversation. That was real. That mattered. What Derek was less good at were the parts nobody photographs. The contract language that determines whether a cost overrun bankrupts you or stays containable. The insurance riders that protect against third-party liability on public works projects. The compliance documentation that separates a company that wins city bids from a company that gets blacklisted. The bond applications, the permit filings, the tax filings, the regulatory audits, the annual reports to the Secretary of State. That was my job from day one. My father called it the paperwork side, and the phrase stuck like a label on a file cabinet. I would spend 11 hours restructuring the company's LLC operating agreement to allow for commercial bonding, and my father would pat my shoulder and say, "Thanks for handling the paperwork, baby girl." I would negotiate a $100,000 reduction in our insurance premiums by rewriting the liability framework, and Derek would mention at dinner that Nadia did some paperwork stuff that saved us some money, I think. The word paperwork was a cage, and every time someone used it, the bars got a little tighter. 2 years into my time at the company, I started building Project Core. I wrote the first line of code on a Saturday morning in the second bedroom of my apartment, the carriage house I rented on Trad Street in downtown Charleston. The company was using a combination of spreadsheets, sticky notes, and Derek's memory to track a growing portfolio of commercial projects, and I could see the wall we were going to hit. You can run 3 residential jobs on spreadsheets and handshakes. You cannot run 12 commercial projects worth a combined $15 million on spreadsheets and handshakes. Someone was going to miss a compliance deadline. Someone was going to lose a permit. Someone was going to send a crew to the wrong site on the wrong day, and the city was going to pull our bonding eligibility, and everything my father had built over 30 years was going to collapse because nobody was willing to invest in systems. So I built the system myself. Project Core. Proprietary project management software that handles scheduling, compliance tracking, document management, permit workflows, daily crew assignments, and real-time budget monitoring. I wrote it on my own laptop, on my own time, using my own Clemson computer science education and 6 months of late nights. Every project manager in the company logs into it every morning. Every inspector pulls permits through it. Every subcontractor receives daily assignments through it. The foremen check it before they start their trucks. The accounting department runs payroll reports through it. Project Core is the circulatory system of a $30 million company, and I built it in a spare bedroom. I wrote the licensing agreement myself. Whitfield & Sons uses Project Core under an exclusive internal license that I, as the sole developer and intellectual property owner, granted to the company. The license is renewable annually. Termination requires 72 hours written notice from either party. I wrote that termination clause at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, running on cold coffee and the last of a bag of peanut M&Ms, and it was just good legal practice. Standard language. You always build an exit into a license agreement. That's not a trap. That's competence. Derek asked about it once, about 3 years ago. He called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing a bond application. Hey, that software thing you made. Can we get Chad to update it? He's pretty good with computers. Chad was a 22-year-old intern who had fixed the office printer by turning it off and turning it back on. I told Derek that the source code was proprietary and that I handled all updates personally. He said, "Okay, cool," the way you say "okay, cool" when someone tells you something you've already stopped listening to and hung up. The surety bonds required a different kind of commitment. 5 years before the wedding, the company was trying to pivot from residential to commercial work. Commercial construction in South Carolina requires performance and payment bonds for any public project over $100,000. The bonds guarantee that if the contractor fails to complete the work, the bonding company steps in. But to get bonded, you need a personal guarantor, someone with the financial depth and professional credentials to back the company's obligations with their own assets. No bonding company would touch us. Whitfield & Sons had the revenue history, but not the financial depth. Derek's personal credit was wrecked from a boat he'd financed in a moment of optimism and a condo he'd walked away from during the 2016 market dip. My father's retirement accounts were already leveraged against the company's line of credit. The bonding agent, a woman named Pauline Greer, who had been in the surety industry for 30 years and had seen every version of this conversation, looked across her mahogany desk at me and folded her hands. Someone has to personally guarantee these bonds. You understand what that means, Miss Whitfield. If Whitfield & Sons defaults on a bonded project, you are personally liable. Your assets, your savings, your credit rating, your future earnings, everything. I looked at the document. 12 pages of indemnification language, the kind I could have written myself because I had spent 3 years studying exactly this kind of language. I picked up the pen. My father stood behind me in that office. His hand came down on my shoulder after I signed heavy and warm, and he said, "Your brother's lucky to have you." I held on to that sentence for years. I pressed it into my memory like a flower between pages and took it out whenever the weight of everything else got heavy. "Your brother's lucky to have you," he said it once. He meant it, I think, in that moment in that office, watching his daughter take on personal financial liability so his son could be president of a company that builds things. He just never said it again. And when he introduced us at industry dinners and Chamber of Commerce events, it was always, "This is my son, Derek the president, and my daughter, Nadia. She helps out with the legal stuff. She helps out," as if I were a neighbor who stopped by on weekends to sort mail. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday evening in June at the main house at Middleton Place. The kind of venue that costs more to rent for a weekend than most people in Charleston earn in 3 months. Live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Candlelight reflected off the Ashley River. String lights threaded through the trees like someone had tried to decorate the sky. Vanessa had planned every detail with the precision of a woman who treated a wedding as a stage production, and every element as either a prop or an audience. Vanessa Cole, 29 years old, event planner from a family in Savannah with old money and new opinions about how that money should be displayed. She met Derek at a charity gala 6 months before the wedding. I was there that night. I watched her cross the room toward my brother with the focus of someone who had already done the math. Derek was tall, loud, confident president of a $30 million construction company. His name was on a building. His photo was on a website. Vanessa saw the surface and bet on it, and I don't blame her for that. People marry the version of the story that looks best in a frame. The first time I had dinner with Vanessa, she asked what I did at the company. I told her general counsel and operations director. She tilted her head and smiled. Oh, so you handle the admin side. That must keep you so busy. Before I could respond, she turned to Derek and asked about the new project in Mount Pleasant, and I sat there with my wine and my job title and watched it dissolve like sugar in water. Admin side. The paperwork cage had a new name now. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner in a slate blue dress that Simone had helped me pick out at a boutique on Upper King Street. Simone Carter. My best friend since law school, corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in Charleston, the sharpest person I know, and the only one in my life who has never confused my quiet for compliance. She tried on the dress first to make sure it didn't look like a judicial robe, her words. It didn't. It looked like something a woman wears when she wants to feel like herself in a room full of people who only see the version of her they've assigned. At the rehearsal dinner, I found my parents near the bar. My father was telling a story about the early days of the company. My mother, Gloria, stood beside him in a cream-colored dress, her hand on his arm, her smile fixed and warm, a performance of comfort rather than an expression of it. Derek spotted me from across the room and waved me over. Hey, come meet Vanessa's folks. He put his arm around my shoulder and steered me toward a couple in their 60s. The father had silver hair and a watch band that cost more than my car payment. The mother had pearls and a handshake that lingered exactly long enough to assess. Derek said, "This is my sister Nadia. She helps with the legal stuff at the company." Helps with. The same phrase. Every time the same phrase delivered with the same casual warmth as if he were complimenting me, as if helps with were generous. Vanessa's mother smiled the way people smile when they've already placed you as the assistant and asked if I'd tried the shrimp puffs. My father was 3 feet away. He was looking at the river. He had heard it. He said nothing. The conversation drifted as rehearsal dinner conversations do toward the company. A family friend named Arthur Beecham, a retired contractor who'd known my father for decades, started talking about how Whitfield and Sons kept winning City of Charleston contracts. That's a brutal procurement process, Arthur said, swirling his drink. City of Charleston doesn't hand those out because you're a nice guy. Someone over there must really know their compliance game. Derek leaned back in his chair and grinned. We've got a great team. Really solid team effort. I sipped my drink and said nothing. The city's procurement director, James Okafor, had insisted on a personal clause in our master services agreement 3 years ago. The clause specified that I, Nadia Whitfield, had to remain as lead counsel and project compliance officer for all city work. If I left the city, reserved the right to terminate or renegotiate every active contract within 60 days. James told me once during a coffee meeting after a contract review sitting in the cafe off Broad Street, where the sunlight came through the front windows and fell across the table in long rectangles. The company is the company, Nadia. But you're the reason I keep signing. That clause was worth $18 million in active municipal contracts. $18 million. And I sipped my drink in a slate blue dress and said absolutely nothing because saying something would have meant making a scene, and Whitfield women don't make scenes. We absorb them. Vanessa was moving through the room, touching elbows, laughing bright and loud, a laugh aimed at the audience rather than the joke. At one point, she stopped near a cluster of her friends and said something I wasn't meant to hear but did. His sister, she handles paperwork or something. She doesn't run anything. She's sweet, though. Very helpful. She doesn't run anything. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom. The Middleton Place bathrooms have marble counters and soft lighting and tiny bottles of hand lotion that smell like lavender. I locked the door and called Simone. "How's the circus?" she answered. "Vanessa just told a group of people I don't run anything. Tell me you're surprised so I can laugh at you." Derek introduced me as, "She helps with the legal stuff." Again, Simone went quiet. When Simone goes quiet, it means she's too angry to construct a sentence that doesn't contain profanity. Then, in a low voice, Nadia, "I know. Why are you still there? Because he's my brother. Because he's getting married. Because I love him and this is his weekend. You can love someone and still stop letting them use you as a doormat with a law degree. It's one weekend, Simone. It's been 8 years. I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror. The slate blue dress, the gold pendant from my grandmother tucked inside the neckline, resting against my chest where nobody could see it. My grandmother gave me that pendant when I was 16, pressing it into my palm with both her hands. She said, "This was my mother's. She worked her whole life and never got her name on anything. You're going to be different, baby." I wore it every single day, tucked under my shirt out of sight. Like a promise I kept making but never out loud. The rest of the rehearsal dinner passed the way these events pass when you've been assigned a role and have agreed to play it. I smiled when Vanessa's father made a toast about his daughter finding her match. I laughed at Arthur's stories about the old days, when Earl showed up to jobs in cutoff shorts and built decks with his bare hands and a circular saw that had no safety guard. I ate the scallops and the risotto and drank 2 glasses of wine and made small talk with a cousin of Vanessa's from Atlanta who asked me 3 times what I did for a living and 3 times forgot the answer. Around 10 o'clock, the party wound down. People moved toward the valet station, in clusters laughing, holding each other's elbows. Derek hugged me on his way out. A real hug, arms all the way around, chin on my shoulder. "Thanks for being here, Nadia. Means a lot." He smelled like bourbon and aftershave and the lavender soap Vanessa had probably put in his bathroom. And I hugged him back because he meant it, and because meaning it for 5 seconds at the end of the night doesn't undo the rest of the night, but it also doesn't stop being real just because the rest of the night was what it was. I walked back to my hotel room alone, heels in my hand, gravel from the parking lot pressing into the soles of my bare feet. The night air was warm and heavy with jasmine. A frog was singing from somewhere near the reflecting pool, one note repeated, patient and purposeless. In the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. The Project Core admin dashboard glowed on the screen. 23 active projects, 14 crew teams, 6 pending permit applications. All of it running on software I had built in a spare bedroom. I swiped to my email. A folder labeled Indemnification contained every surety bond document the company held, each one bearing my signature, my personal guarantee, my financial life pledged against the company's ability to perform. One more swipe brought up James Okafor's contact card. The man whose signature was worth $18 million in active contracts and whose trust was built on years of coffee meetings with me personally, not with the company, not with Derek, with me. I held the phone, the way you hold something that could change everything if you press the right buttons in the right order. The screen glowed against the dark hotel room ceiling when I tilted it. 3 tools, 3 exits, 3 doors that I had built into the architecture of a company that treated me like furniture, and all I had to do was open them. I set the phone on the nightstand. I turned off the lamp. I lay there in the dark for a long time, listening to the air conditioner cycle and the occasional car on the highway and the silence that fills a room when you're the only person in it and you've run out of excuses to pretend. That's a choice. I went to sleep eventually. The peace was still worth keeping. That's what I told myself. I said it inside my head like a sentence on repeat, the way you say something you need to believe until you can fall asleep believing it. The peace was still worth keeping. Saturday morning came heavy with June light in the low country, bright and thick the air, already loaded with humidity by 7:30. A knock on my hotel room door. I opened it to find my father in the hallway, dress shirt rolled to the elbows, suspenders loose around his hips, standing with the posture of a man who'd been sent to deliver a message he hadn't written. "Morning, baby girl. Morning, Dad." He looked past me into the room like he was searching for something to comment on, then back at me. "Big day for your brother. Let's keep everything smooth, all right. No complications." "When have I ever been a complication, Dad?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the carpet between his shoes, a pattern of gold diamonds on burgundy that neither of us was actually seeing. He patted my arm, the same gesture he'd used in the bonding office 5 years ago, the gesture that said, "I see you, but I will not say it in words that anyone else can hear," and he walked back down the hallway. My mother stood at the far end near the elevator watching. She didn't come closer. She didn't wave. She turned and followed him. No complications. When I was 15, my father drove to a construction industry banquet with Derek in the passenger seat. I asked to come. He said, "It's not really your kind of thing, baby girl. You'd be bored." I stayed home and read the industry magazine that came in the mail. When I was 17, I told him I was going to study computer science and law so I could modernize the business. He said, "That's sweet, Nadia, but Derek's going to run things. You could help him out, though, on the paperwork side." The paperwork side. And now, on the morning of Derek's wedding, the message was the same message it had been for 16 years. Make yourself small so your brother can stand tall. The ceremony was beautiful. I will give Vanessa that much, and I mean it as genuine credit, because I am not a person who withholds credit, even from people who withhold it from me. The Middleton Place Gardens in mid-June, late afternoon, the light turning everything amber and gold. The live oaks cast shadows long enough to lie down in. The officiant stood beneath an arch, woven with white peonies and trailing greenery, and the string quartet played something slow and classical, something that made the air feel more serious, more permanent. I sat in the third row behind Vanessa's family. My mother was in the front row with my father, both of them looking straight ahead, my mother's hand folded over, my father's on the armrest. Nobody had asked me to sit in the front row. Nobody had suggested it. I simply wasn't considered front row family, and I'd learned a long time ago that fighting for a seat at the table required more energy than the seat was worth. Or so I told myself. Derek cried during his vows. Real tears, the kind that come from a place you don't rehearse and can't fake. His voice broke on the word forever, and he laughed at himself, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand, and the audience laughed with him the way people laugh when they're moved and don't want to admit it. Vanessa reached up and touched his face, and the photographer crouched to get the angle, and the shutter clicked 3 times. That image was going to end up framed on their mantel in a silver frame that Vanessa had already picked out. I cried too. Quietly in the third row with my hands folded in my lap and my tears running down my cheeks and dripping off my jawline onto the bodice of the slate blue dress. Because I love my brother. That's the part people don't want to hear in a story like this. They want the villain to be a villain from the opening line. But Derek split his Kit Kats with me when we were kids and always gave me the bigger half. He taught me to ride a bike in the driveway of our first house on James Island, running beside me with his hand on the seat, yelling, "You got it, Nadia, you got it," until I did. When I passed the bar exam, he took me to Husk for dinner and sat across a table lit by a single candle. "You're the smartest person I know, Nadia." He meant it that night. I carry that sentence next to the one my father said in the bonding office, 2 small true things in a long inventory of erasures. The cocktail hour was on the terrace overlooking the Ashley River, past hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. A bartender making custom cocktails named after the bride and groom. The golden hour light turning every surface into a warm photograph. Derek was holding court near the bar, a bourbon in one hand and Vanessa's waist in the other, surrounded by her family and a few of his construction crew leaders. I stood near the railing and listened. "We just landed an $8 million contract with the city," Derek was saying, his voice carrying the way it always carried the voice of a man who has never had to ask whether the room was listening. "Biggest single job in company history, the Calhoun Street renovation. Full commercial build-out. Should take us 18 months. $8 million. The bond for that contract was in my name. The compliance plan bore my fingerprints on every page. The relationship with the procurement office existed because I had spent 3 years building it, one meeting at a time, one audit response at a time, one late-night email revision at a time. Derek landed that contract the way a man lands a fish that someone else hooked, fought, and reeled in before placing it gently on his line. I drifted from the terrace toward the carriage house where the reception would be held. Exposed brick walls. Long farm tables draped in white linen, each one set with white plates and more silverware than any meal requires. The seating chart was displayed on a large framed board near the entrance, calligraphy names arranged in neat clusters under table numbers. I scanned for mine. Table 1, Derek and Vanessa Whitfield. Earl and Gloria Whitfield. Charles and Marguerite Cole, parents of the bride. Table 2, Vanessa's college sorority sisters. Table 3, Derek's groomsmen and their dates. Tables 4 through 8, extended family business associates, family friends. Arthur Beecham and his wife at table 5. Vanessa's cousin from Atlanta at table 6. I scanned every table. I read every name. Some of the names were familiar. Most of them were Vanessa's people. My name was not on any of them. A wedding coordinator stood near the kitchen entrance, a young woman with a headset looped around her neck and a clipboard pressed against her chest. I approached her. "Excuse me, I'm Nadia Whitfield, the groom's sister. My name doesn't seem to be on the seating chart." She checked her clipboard, turned a page, turned another. Her finger ran down a column of names, and when it stopped, her face performed the kind of micro-adjustment that people make when they've been trained to deliver bad news pleasantly. "You're in the overflow seating, Miss Whitfield. Through that door." She pointed toward the kitchen. "The kitchen. It's a secondary dining area. We set it up for additional staff and a few extra guests. The bride arranged it personally." Vanessa had looked at the seating chart, seen my name, and moved it to the kitchen. She hadn't forgotten me. She had categorized me. Staff. Admin. The sister who does paperwork. You seat those people with the caterers. I walked through the kitchen door. The space was what you'd expect from a catering kitchen at a historic venue: stainless steel, counters, industrial ovens, the smell of roasted chicken and warm rosemary bread. A long folding table had been pushed against the far wall, covered with a paper tablecloth, the kind with the plastic backing that sticks to your forearms in humidity. 6 folding chairs. 3 of them were occupied by caterers on their break, still in their black aprons, eating plates of food they'd served to the other guests minutes ago. And there, propped against a water glass with a visible smudge on the rim, was a place card in the same calligraphy as every other card at the wedding. Nadia. Same handwriting, same ink, same calligraphy pen that had written Derek and Vanessa on the head table card and Charles and Marguerite on the parents of the bride card and Arthur and Helen on table 5. The same hand that wrote those names on those cards for those tables had also written my name on this card at this table in this kitchen. The calligraphy was beautiful. I will give whoever wrote it that. I sat down. I sat down because that's what I had been doing for 8 years. Absorbing the insult, accepting the diminishment, filing the pain in the same drawer where I filed everything else that hurt my father's paperwork label. Derek's, she helps out introductions. Vanessa's, she doesn't run anything. I sat down at a folding table in a kitchen while 140 guests celebrated my brother's wedding in a room full of crystal and candlelight at tables with porcelain plates and real glasses without smudges and real chairs. That didn't fold. A server brought me a plate. The same food as the reception, plated with slightly less care. She set it down and paused. Her eyes moved from the place card to my dress to the pendant visible above my neckline. Are you with the catering company? No. I'm the groom's sister. Her face changed, something between confusion and pity. She said, "Oh," very quietly and walked away. My phone buzzed. A text from James Okafor. "Congrats on the Calhoun Street milestone. Your team hit every benchmark this quarter. Looking forward to phase 2. He was texting about a project I had shepherded from initial bid to active execution over 14 months. A project Derek would claim at the next industry dinner. A project that existed because James trusted me personally to deliver what I promised. I stared at the screen. Then I stared at the folding table. Then I stared at the kitchen door closed, now the faint sound of jazz and laughter leaking through the gap at the bottom. Something shifted. I wish I had a poetic way to describe it, a metaphor that would make it feel literary and earned. But it wasn't poetic. Something that had been bending for 8 years stopped bending and broke. It was not rage. Rage is loud and temporary, a fire that burns through fuel and leaves ash. This was structural. The way a load-bearing wall doesn't crack with drama or noise. It just reaches its capacity, and then the math changes, and what held up the building a moment ago is now the reason the building is coming down. I stood up. I pushed back the folding chair. The metal legs scraped against the kitchen floor. The caterers looked up from their plates. I walked to the kitchen door and opened it. The ballroom was golden. Candles burning on every table, their light reflected in the silverware and the wine glasses and the polished surfaces that Vanessa had spent 6 months selecting. The jazz trio was playing something slow and elegant. Vanessa was at table 1, laughing, her hand on Derek's arm, her head tilted at the angle that photographs well. Derek had his arm draped over the back of her chair, a glass of bourbon in his free hand, the posture of a man who has never once considered that the ground beneath him was built by someone else. My father leaned back in his chair with the quiet satisfaction of a patriarch surveying the empire he was certain he had built. My mother sat beside him, her smile smooth and untroubled, the expression she had worn at every family event for as long as I could trace back, the one that said, "Everything is fine, everything has always been fine, please don't say anything that makes this untrue." Nobody had come looking for me. Nobody had walked through the kitchen door and said, "Where's Nadia?" Nobody had scanned the room and registered my absence because my absence was not something this family had ever been trained to notice. I was the paperwork. I was the legal stuff. I was the sister who helps, and helping does not require a presence at the table, only a proximity to the work. I pulled out my phone. The first email took 11 seconds to send. I had composed it months ago. It lived in my drafts folder, the way a fire extinguisher lives in a wall cabinet, not because you want a fire, but because you understand how buildings work and buildings can burn. The email was addressed to Derek, my father, and the company's registered agent. Subject line: Notice of License Termination, Project Core Software Platform. The body was 4 sentences of language I could have written in my sleep because I had written the original agreement, because I had written every agreement this company had ever executed, pursuant to Section 4.2 of the exclusive license agreement dated the 14th of March 2021. I am providing 72 hours written notice of termination of the license granted to Whitfield & Sons General Contracting LLC, effective 9:00 p.m. Eastern Tuesday, June 18. All access credentials will be deactivated at that time. This notice is irrevocable. Send. The second email went to Pauline Greer at the bonding company. Subject line, formal notice of withdrawal as personal guarantor. I was withdrawing my personal indemnification from every active surety bond held by Whitfield & Sons. Under the terms of the General Indemnity Agreement, the bonding company had to be notified of any change in the indemnitor's status. My withdrawal would not void the bonds overnight, but it would trigger an immediate review. Pauline would read this email on Monday morning, and she would pick up the phone and call me, and I would confirm it, and she would begin the process that every bonding agent dreads: reassessment. Without a qualified personal guarantor, Whitfield & Sons could not be rebonded. Without bonds, they could not hold public contracts. Without public contracts, they lost the City of Charleston portfolio. $18 million suspended on the question of who was willing to put their name on the line. Send. The third email went to James Okafor. Subject line, resignation and notification, under MSA Personal Clause. I was resigning my position as lead counsel and project compliance officer for Whitfield & Sons, effective immediately, and formally notifying the City of Charleston that the personal clause in our master services agreement had been triggered. The clause gave the city the right to terminate or renegotiate all active contracts within 60 days of my departure. James did not have to pull the contract, but I had sat across from him in city conference rooms for 3 years, and I had watched him write that clause into the agreement himself in his own handwriting in the margin of a draft I'd submitted. He wrote it because he trusted me. If I was gone, the trust went with me. Send. 3 emails, 30 seconds. $30 million in active projects now suspended between a 72-hour software deadline, a bond review that could take months to resolve, and a city procurement director who had just been informed that the only person he trusted at Whitfield & Sons was no longer there. I put my phone back in my purse. I smoothed the front of my slate blue dress. I touched the gold pendant at my collarbone. And I walked across the ballroom floor to table 1. Derek saw me first. His face opened into the smile he always gave me, the one that was 50% affection and 50% the confidence that comes from never having to wonder whether you're welcome. Hey, Nadia, having fun? Congratulations, Derek. I looked at him, then at Vanessa. Beautiful wedding, Vanessa. Everything is gorgeous. Vanessa turned. Her smile was polished and automatic. Thank you, sweetie. I hope the overflow area wasn't too uncomfortable. We were just so tight on space. Mom. Dad. I looked at my mother, whose hands were folded in her lap, and my father, whose bourbon was half finished and whose expression was open and unsuspecting. I'm leaving. Derek's smile faltered by a fraction. Leaving. It's barely 9 o'clock. Leaving the company. The jazz trio played a bar and a half of something by Coltrane. A waiter crossed behind me carrying a tray of chocolate mousse in crystal cups. Vanessa's mother at the far end of the table set down her fork. My mother's hands tightened in her lap, knuckles pressing against each other. 3 seconds of silence. Maybe 4. Maybe a lifetime compressed into the space between one heartbeat and the next. Derek tilted his head. It was the same tilt he gave me when I brought up contract language at dinner, or mentioned a compliance deadline during a family barbecue, or tried to explain why the bonding requirements mattered. The tilt that said, "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Come on, Nadia. Don't make this a thing. We'll talk about it Monday." Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down at it the way you glance at a phone during a conversation, casually already planning to dismiss it. Then his eyes stayed on the screen. Then my father's phone buzzed. Then, from somewhere deeper in the ballroom, another phone buzzed and another, because Project Core had just pushed an automated system notification to every registered user in the company: licensee expiration notice. All system access will terminate in 72 hours. Contact your system administrator for details. The system administrator was me. There was no other system administrator. There had never been another system administrator. I watched the color leave Derek's face. It went slowly at first, like he was trying to process the notification as a glitch, a mistake, a thing that couldn't be real. Then quickly, as comprehension arrived, "What did you do?" His voice had dropped. The charm was gone. Underneath it was something thinner and less constructed. "I didn't do anything, Derek. I stopped doing everything." Vanessa grabbed his arm. Her smile was gone too. "She's bluffing, Derek. She doesn't run anything. Tell her she's bluffing." My father stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, a sound that cut through the music and the murmur of conversation at the nearby tables. He set his bourbon down on the tablecloth. And for 1 second, 1/2 second that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, I saw something in his face that I had never seen directed at me before. He was afraid. "Nadia." His voice was careful. "Sit down. Let's talk about this. You had 8 years to talk about this, Dad." I looked at the head table, at the 6 place settings, at the chairs that belonged to the people who were considered principal. "You had a seat at this table to talk about this." I looked at the space where my chair would have been if anyone had considered putting one there. There was no space. There had never been a space. "Enjoy your evening." Derek stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, a mirror of our father's movement seconds earlier. "Nadia, wait. Just wait. You can't just..." He looked at his phone again, then at me, then at our father, then back at me. His mouth was open, but no words were coming out because for the first time in his life, the situation required something more than charm, and charm was all he had. Vanessa put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide and fixed on Derek's phone screen, reading the notification over his shoulder. The bride who had arranged a folding chair in a kitchen for the woman who guaranteed every bond her husband's company held was now reading the consequences of that arrangement in real time in a system font on a 6-inch screen. My mother had not moved. She sat in her chair at table 1 with her hands in her lap and her smile gone and her face the color of the tablecloth. She looked at me the way she had looked at me my entire life, as if I were doing something wrong by existing at the wrong volume. I turned and walked across the ballroom. Through the foyer, past the floral arrangements, Vanessa had spent months selecting past the guest book that nobody had asked me to sign, past the framed engagement photos where Derek and Vanessa smiled in golden light with their whole future, arranged in front of them like a table setting. The front door of the Middleton Place carriage house opened onto a night that smelled like jasmine and river mud and warm grass. The parking lot was gravel. Cicadas in the live oaks, loud and mechanical, the sound that summer makes in the South Carolina Lowcountry when nobody is talking. I got in my car. My hands were shaking, both of them gripping the steering wheel, trembling in a way I could not control and did not try to stop. I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, engine off, windows down, listening to the cicadas and the distant sound of jazz from inside the carriage house where my family was processing what had just happened. I called Simone. She answered on the second ring. "How bad?" "They put me in the kitchen." Vanessa rearranged the seating. Folding chair, kitchen, between the caterers. Simone went quiet. When Simone goes quiet, it means she is too angry to construct a sentence that doesn't contain profanity. Then, slowly controlled, "What did you do?" "Everything." Everything meaning, what project core? The bonds. "James." "All 3. More silence. Longer this time. Then in a voice I had never heard from her before, soft and certain and without a trace of humor, "Good. Is it good, Nadia? Is it good that you stopped letting people who seat you in the kitchen control your entire professional life and your financial future and your self-respect?" "Yes, it is good." Yeah. Call me when you get home. I'll be up." I started the car. The engine turned over on the first try, which seemed like a small miracle given that everything else in my life had just detonated. I pulled out of the gravel lot and onto the 2-lane road that leads away from Middleton Place. In the dark, the live oaks on both sides form a canopy overhead, and the road feels like a tunnel, like you're driving through something rather than away from it. I turned on the radio. A song came on, something with a guitar line that I liked. Something that made the car feel less empty and the night feel less permanent. I turned it up. I did not cry. I was not exactly sad. I was something that lives on the other side of a decision you have been deferring for years. Lighter, emptier, like a building after the furniture has been moved out and you can finally hear how the rooms actually sound. Sunday morning. My apartment on Trad Street. Coffee in the blue ceramic mug Simone gave me for my 30th birthday, the one with a chip on the handle that I refuse to replace because the chip is part of it now. My phone sat on the kitchen counter screen down, and I let it sit there for a long time before I turned it over. 17 missed calls from Derek, 4 from my father, 6 texts from numbers I didn't recognize, which I guessed were project managers who had seen the termination notice and were trying to reach the only person who could reverse it, and 1 text from my mother. It was the only message she had sent, and it said, "How could you do this to your brother on his wedding day?" I read it twice. The second time was slower, not because I needed to understand the words, but because I was marveling at the consistency. How could you do this to your brother? Not how could your brother's wife seat you in the kitchen, not how could we let this happen. How could you do this to your brother? Even now, even after all of it, the framing was the same. I was the actor. Derek was the one acted upon. My leaving was an injury to him. His dismissal of me was just the way things were. I typed back, "I didn't do this to Derek. I stopped doing it for Derek. There's a difference, Mom. He just never had to learn it because I was always there to carry it." I read my own text 3 times before I sent it. Then I sent it and set the phone face down on the counter and poured more coffee. The Sunday morning light came through the kitchen window and fell across the counter in a bright, warm stripe, and I stood in it for a while, my hands wrapped around the mug, drinking coffee I had made in my own kitchen, in my own house paid, for with my own money earned from work that mattered, even if the people I did it for never said so. 4 months later, on a Tuesday in October, I signed a lease on 1,200 square feet of office space in a converted warehouse on Upper King Street. The building had exposed brick-tall windows and the kind of natural light that makes you want to stay past 5. The sign on the door said Whitfield Legal and Compliance LLC. My name, my firm, nobody else's. I hired 1 employee, Tessa Morant, a paralegal who had worked at Whitfield & Sons for 6 years. She quit the Monday after I left. When I asked her why, she said, "I spent 6 years watching you carry that company. I'm not going to work for the people who put you in the kitchen." I gave her a raise and a desk by the window. James Okafor called me 2 weeks after I filed the incorporation papers. "I heard you went out on your own," he said. His voice carried a warmth that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with professional respect. "I've got a compliance consulting contract that needs someone who actually reads the fine print." Interested, he was my first client. The city of Charleston had terminated the master services agreement with Whitfield & Sons 38 days after my resignation triggered the personal clause. The contracts were rebid. James recommended me personally as an independent compliance consultant for the city's new construction projects. The contract was $400,000 a year, small compared to the empire I had built for someone else. But the name on the contract was mine, and nobody was going to crop me out of the signing photo. The family company shed revenue the way a tree sheds leaves in a drought. $30 million dropped to roughly $6 million within 4 months. The Project Core license expired on schedule. Derek's new attorney, hired from a mid-size firm in Columbia, spent 3 weeks trying to build a replacement system and produced something that the project managers described as functional, the way you describe a car with no air. Conditioning as functional. The surety bonds were canceled after Pauline Greer's review confirmed that no remaining member of the Whitfield family could qualify as a personal guarantor. Without bonds, the company could not bid on public contracts. Without public contracts, Derek was back to residential renovations, the deck replacements, and bathroom remodels that my father had started with 30 years ago. An empire returned to the foundation it had always rested on because the person who built every floor above it had walked away and taken the architecture with her. I did not gloat about any of this. I noted it the way you note whether it happened, it was always going to happen, and pretending otherwise was never going to change the forecast. My father called 3 months after the wedding, a Tuesday evening in September. I was at my new desk reviewing a contract for Tessa to file the gold pendant from my grandmother, resting against my collarbone, visible outside my shirt where anyone in the room could see it. "Nadia." "Dad." A long pause, the sound of him breathing. He was not a man built for conversations like this. He had spent 62 years communicating through hand pats and half sentences and the assumption that his presence was enough. He cleared his throat. "I should have taken you to that banquet." I closed my eyes. 15 years since I pressed my face to the window and watched his truck pull out of the driveway with Derek in the passenger seat. 15 years since my mother told me to stop pouting because my brother needed it more than I did. "Yeah, Dad, you should have." Silence. Then, "Your mother wants you to call her." "I know." Will you? I don't know yet. He didn't push. We sat on the line for another 10 seconds breathing, and then he said goodbye and hung up. It was not an apology. It was not enough. But it was the first time in 15 years that he had acknowledged the thing he'd done, without wrapping it in a joke or a dismissal, and I held on to it the way I hold on to all the small, true things carefully, without expecting more to follow. Tessa asked me once during a late afternoon when the work was done and we were eating peanut butter crackers from the vending machine down the hall if I missed the old company. I told her the truth. I missed the scale. I missed the feeling of 23 projects running simultaneously, the complexity of it, the way a problem at one job site would ripple through three others, and I'd have to solve the cascade before it reached the client. I missed being the engine of something large. But I did not miss being an engine that nobody acknowledged was running. There is a difference between building something big and building something yours, and I was learning that the second one fits better even if it's smaller. I hung a photograph on the wall across from my desk. Black and white, 1968. My grandmother at 31, my age now, standing in front of a house she cleaned but did not own, wearing a dress she had sewn from fabric she bought at the discount store on Rivers Avenue. She was holding my mother's hand. My mother was too, squinting at the camera, unaware that the woman holding her up would spend the next 40 years holding everyone up without her name appearing on a single deed document or paycheck stub. My grandmother worked 3 jobs. She raised 4 children. She never got her name on anything. She gave me a gold pendant and said, "You're going to be different, baby." For 8 years, I almost wasn't. I almost repeated every pattern she couldn't break, pouring my intelligence into someone else's operation, building foundations that bore someone else's name, hiding my value under my shirt where nobody could see it, because some part of me had absorbed the lesson my family never said out loud: your worth is real, but it should stay invisible because visible worth in a woman makes the men around her uncomfortable, and keeping them comfortable is your actual job. Simone came by with lunch. She walked in without knocking the way she always did, carrying 2 containers of shrimp and grits from the place on Meeting Street that we'd been eating at since law school. We sat at my desk. She told me about a case she was handling, something involving a non-compete clause and a CEO who had been secretly consulting for a competitor. I told her the non-compete was probably unenforceable under the new FTC guidance. She said I was wrong about the timeline and right about the substance, which she announced was our standard ratio, and I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on the contract draft I'd been reviewing. Tessa handed me napkins from across the room without looking up from her monitor. Simone called me a disaster. The afternoon light came through the warehouse windows and turned the brick walls the color of warm clay. I have been thinking about what it means to build something that everyone depends on but nobody sees. For 8 years, I was the invisible architecture of my family's company. The contracts, the software, the bonds, the relationships with city officials and bonding agents and subcontractors and inspectors. Every beam and joist of that operation passed through my hands, and I let my family stand on the finished floor without ever asking them to look down and see who was holding it up. I told myself the work was enough. I told myself that if I built it well enough, the structure would speak for itself, and they would eventually look down and say, "Nadia did this." They never looked down. They put their furniture on my floor and their photographs on my walls and hosted their parties in my rooms, and when it came time to seat the guests, they put me in the kitchen. I used to call that humility. I used to tell myself that staying quiet about my contributions was a form of strength, the noble approach, the mature thing. Simone called it self-erasure 3 years ago, and I argued with her for an hour on the phone while sitting in my car in the Whitfield & Sons parking lot. I told her she didn't understand my family, that the dynamics were more complicated than she was making them sound, that sometimes love means accepting less, so the people you love can have more. She said, "That's not love, Nadia. That's a subsidy, and you're not a charity." She was right then, and I was not ready to hear it. She was right from the bathroom at the rehearsal dinner, and she was right in the parking lot when she said good, and she has been right about this for as long as I've been wrong about it. Self-erasure doesn't register as violence when you're the one doing it. It passes for generosity, for grace. And then, one day, you're sitting at a folding table in a kitchen at your own brother's wedding, eating off a plate that a server brought because she assumed you were staff, and you look up and you see yourself clearly for the first time in years. And what you see is a woman who was so committed to being invisible that she almost disappeared. I don't hate my family. I am suspicious of stories where the answer is that simple. I miss Sunday dinners at my parents' house on James Island, the smell of my mother's collard greens, my father dozing in his recliner during the fourth quarter of a Clemson game. I miss the version of Derek who split his Kit Kats down the middle and gave me the bigger half. I miss the version of us that existed before titles and salaries and $30 million turned my family into a hierarchy where my value was measured by how quietly I carried what nobody else was willing to lift. But I will not go back to the kitchen. I will not sit at a folding table and call it love. The gold pendant rests against my collarbone, now visible outside my shirt where anyone can see it if they look. My grandmother's mother wore it in a place where her name appeared on nothing. My grandmother wore it while cleaning houses that belonged to other families. I wore it hidden for 15 years. I am wearing it in the open now because some promises should not be kept in the dark. My name is on the door. My name is on the contracts. My name is on the lease, the bank account, the incorporation documents filed with the South Carolina Secretary of State's office. I built something smaller than what I built before, and it is entirely mine, and on the wall across from my desk is a photograph of a woman who never got to say that. The sky did not fall. The ground held. I am here in my own office, in my own name, and the afternoon light is warming the brick, and the coffee is good, and the work is mine, and for now, for the first time in a very long time, that is enough.